Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shanty. I have some guests with me here in the Shanty today. They're not actually in the Shanty, as you can see from their backgrounds, but they're with me in the Shanty. I have Nate Steed and Kelly Hollingsworth, who are the co-chairs of our Cybersecurity and Privacy Practice Group. Now, I know what you're all saying. Steve, this is an employment law thing. Why are we worried about cybersecurity and privacy? Well, that's a great question. And I'm going to start with Nate and ask him that question. Nate, why should HR care about any of this?
Yeah, it's a great question and a concern we frequently hear. And the assumption is that data privacy and security is largely an IT issue or a technical problem that can be solved. And really, it's not. It's really a people problem. And that's why we like to involve the HR professionals as much as possible, because you can spend all the money that you want in the world on technology and software that will protect your system, but all it takes is for one person to click on a link to undo all of that effort. So really, it's more of a people-focused issue than it is a technology issue. And what we encourage all of our clients to do is focus on training as much as possible. There's no substitute for good training and increasing security awareness within an organization. And that largely and oftentimes falls on the HR folks to make sure that that sort of thing is happening. Also, HR itself as a department has a lot of sensitive information, and it's the kind of information that is often most involved in a data breach that requires notification. So HR houses social security numbers. It may house driver's license information. And that's the kind of data that, if it's compromised, would require notification to affected individuals. So we want to make sure that the HR folks are aware as possible and take the necessary precautions. One thing we've seen most recently and probably most frequently in our practice is business email compromise. I know there's a lot of press around hacks and ransomware and that sort of thing, but by volume, the most frequent compromise we see is business email compromise. That's where a bad guy impersonates somebody else and maybe talks their way into your system, or vice versa, gets access to your system and talks their way into other people's system. And so the email system of any organization can house a lot of sensitive information through onboarding process and that sort of thing, or applications. And so when that email system is compromised, that can result in a lot of work to do to figure out what's happened and potential notification requirements that flow from that.
Well, that's a bit troubling, because I now have all these gift cards I bought because our managing partner last week told me to, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with them. I'm kidding, of course. So Kelly, tell us some best practices that we can put in place regarding employee data and how to protect it.
Sure. So jumping off of what Nate just said, when you're talking about emails themselves, making sure you've limited what data is flowing through emails, how long it's there, etc., is really important. And to the extent you can minimize what you're emailing back and forth to others that contains sensitive information, or making sure that's encrypted, is really key. Because if you can say, look, we don't send that by email, or that's off of our system after, a week after it was sent, that will really reduce what we're looking at if there's a breach. There's also some other things generally you can do with employee data. Being very transparent with your employees about what you're collecting is great. If everybody knows what's out there and what you've got, there's no surprises. Somebody shouldn't be concerned or surprised when you've collected something. And minimizing what you are collecting, really taking a second to say, do we need this data or don't we? We're not going to ask for it if we don't need it, because it's one less thing that could be exposed in a breach. And finally, circling back to just keeping things encrypted and protected, making sure people don't have access if they don't need access. The smallest amount you've got and the better that you've kept it locked out from everybody, the better you're going to be.
Okay, Nate, so I put all these best practices in place, and people being people, we still have a mistake. So when do I need to notify my employees that somebody's made a mistake and there's been a data breach?
A lot of our clients have a rush to judgment when they first find out something bad has happened. Either there's been a ransomware attack or their email's been compromised. And we really encourage our clients to pump the brakes and get our arms around exactly what has happened. When something has occurred, we call it a security incident. until we have a little bit more information, whether it rises to the level of a data breach or not. And we talk about it and email it in terms of a security incident. And that really is a function of either the nature of the data or the location of where the individuals live, or a combination of both. So you could potentially have health information that is subject to HIPAA that would require notification, but health information that might not be part of a health plan, like workers' comp, for example, may not require actual notification to the affected individuals. And that is part of the investigation that you would want your forensic investigators to sort out. We need to figure out what is the data specifically and where do the people who are affected live. That becomes more of a challenge now with more of a mobile or remote workforce, where you could potentially have employees who are residents in states that are not Michigan or not your home state. So you really need to get your arms around where these people live. And it could be potentially past employees as well who have retired and are living elsewhere at that point. So it's a function of state law at that point. In Michigan, as an example, if your social security number is compromised, or your driver's license number, or financial accounts with the means to access those accounts, so like the credit card expiration date and PIN, or bank account passwords, that kind of information requires notification to the affected individual. So we need to figure out what kind of data we're dealing with. And as Kelly alluded to, doing some of those best practices early will help you in this stage of it really understand and get to that answer quicker. When you know what kind of data is housed where, if you know which server was compromised, you can say quickly, oh, we know that server didn't have sensitive information, for example, and making your determination that way. Once you've figured out if there is a legal duty to notify or not, even if there's not a legal duty, you may feel some moral obligation to do so and notify your employees, even if the data wasn't particularly sensitive, but may still be upsetting to those people if they find out that their information was compromised. So we can have those conversations and figure out what those notification obligations are. There are some states that also require notice to the state attorney general or a similar bureau there. So those are all considerations we want to take into account. And like I said, at the initial outset, it is worrying when you have some sort of incident to have to rush to feel like you need to notify. But again, we encourage a conversation there to figure out really what kind of information we're dealing with and what our legal obligations are.
Perfect. Kelly, how do we get the HR team, our team, ready for this? Hoping the bad thing never happens, but being prepared for it when it does.
Absolutely. So as Nate said, data mapping, knowing where your data is, the first questions the lawyers are going to ask are, where do your employees live and what sort of data was compromised? So knowing where the data was is a great heads up and first start to get going. Also, you should have an incident response plan in place, and make sure that's updated. And the people who are named in the incident response plan actually have a hard copy of that response plan with them. I know Nate and I carry ours with us, but making sure you have the right people named for it is important too. And making sure that plan is followed and the people who are on it know who else to be contacting. Another thing to really consider is your third parties that you might need to bring in. For example, forensics. If you're an organization who outsources your IT services to someone, a lot of times they will say, well, we can come in and do some forensics to figure out how the bad guys got in. But there's kind of an inherent conflict of interest there. If they were supposed to be protecting your system from somebody getting in, they're not necessarily going to want to find that they were the one who, helped expose that weakness. So maybe having on file a third party that you can call or contract with, making sure insurance is up to date. The lawyers, we're always available to help, and certainly we can work with your insurance team to make sure everything is up to snuff. But you want to really have all that figured out ahead of time, so you're not scrambling to say, oh gosh, where's Steve's number? I need to call him so he can call Nate and Kelly in on this. So running a couple drills ahead of time is also really a great thing to do. Just pretend you had all your emails compromised and you need to pull up your plan and go through it. That will very quickly expose some weaknesses and help you respond.
Perfect. Okay, let's just touch before we quit on what's going on in the States. I know there's privacy laws popping up all over the place. Everybody wants to be Europe. What's going on in the States?
Yeah, so there's 14 states right now. New Hampshire just added a couple weeks ago, state comprehensive data privacy laws. Now this is on top of, any state who has kind of a HIPAA-esque law, et cetera. But really what's hitting is a lot of new laws per state related to data privacy as a whole. Right now, only California speaks to employee data in any real meaningful way. A lot of the other states kind of ignore that and look to more consumer outside data. But California's law has special things that you need to do, including having a policy telling your employees what you're doing with their data, how you're using it, and who you're sharing it with. We haven't seen any of the other states go that route, but it's still not a bad idea to have something like that in place. And then we're just continually monitoring because every state adds something or has proposed something. And until we see some sort of federal regulation, we're going to be looking at each state differently depending on where your employees live.
Well, it's going to be no surprise to our friends in HR on this thing that California is out there putting policies in place that they don't have anywhere else. I want to thank you both for coming. And before we go, just let everybody know if you want to hear more about this stuff in depth, on the 23rd of April, Kelly and one of our associates, Alex Haywood, right, will be putting on a webinar on this very topic where they'll drill down way deeper than we were able to today. Thanks, guys, for joining me. I appreciate it very much. We'll see you guys next time.